Hi everybody. I thought I'd make this short video for those of you who weren't here for class last Wednesday. Joseph and Amrit and Lila, I know you were really sleep deprived from flying back from Japan, so I understand if you were feeling pretty dozy. Anyway, last Wednesday I introduced two techniques that are really great to add to your arsenal as you're starting out this journey to become more skilled at your drawing. And the two tools that I introduced last week are two types of grid making. Artists use grids a lot, especially if they're doing highly detailed work. Sometimes artists will use grids if they have to be very exacting. Many artists will use a grid when they're starting a portrait just to make sure that, you know, the features are accurate and everything is proportional and in the right place. But when you're kind of new at drawing, a grid can just give you that extra sureness that you have seen things accurately and you've put them in the right place. So the first grid that I showed you how to do last week was just a simple box grid. Think of a graph with an X and a Y axis. We just made a series of rectangles. It was like a 3x4 rectangle, and we all chose an eye to draw using that sort of quadricular grid. The grid that I showed you how to do next was something that I like to call my magic grid, and I learned it a long time ago from a great teacher, and I've used it for over 30 years. I've taught little kids how to use it. I've taught big kids, grown-ups. It's a really easy grid and it's pretty foolproof. And the nice thing about grids is that, you know, you can change the size of your subject. You can shrink it down and make it really tiny. You can blow it up and make it, you know, the size of a wall. As long as you're keeping the proportions of the grid accurate, then you're good to go. So my magic grid involves a couple of simple lines that basically just repeat themselves. And so I took a black and white photograph, and everybody got to choose a different photograph last week. And I like this rose because there's, you know, the attraction of the petals is really beautiful. There's a nice range of values in the photograph. And it's easy. I can see how it's going to be pretty easy to plot these lines and these shapes using a grid. So the first thing that I did was I used a black pen and I did a grid on this photograph. And once you have your photograph or whatever you're using as your reference, once you have that gridded, then you need to do the grid on your paper. So I'm using a 2B pencil. When you're doing a grid, you definitely don't want to use something as dark as a 2B. You want to kind of keep it in like the 2H, 4H value range because you're going to want to get rid of the grid after you've laid out your drawing. The grid is really just a tool to help you make sure that you're being accurate, but you don't want to see it in the final version of your drawing. So the first thing that I did was I measured the image, and then I recreated the same size rectangle here. And I'm keeping things, you know, right next to each other so that I can kind of go back and forth easily and look at my reference and then draw here on my paper. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with my two diagonal lines, and take your time and make sure that you are really hitting the corners. I'm going to draw dark, but remember when you're doing this, you want to draw very light. Again, just taking my time and making sure that these lines are going to hit those corners exactly. Now I'm going to go ahead and make a horizontal line right through the middle of my X. I could measure and find the halfway point, but I also know that if I put the edge of my ruler right here on the edge of this line, and line it up with the center of the X, that it'll be accurate. And then I'll do the same thing by adding a vertical line. And there are my initial lines. Some people will just be happy just with this grid. I'm going to take it a little bit further. And as you become more experienced with your drawing, and if you're liking grids and you're using them, you might find at times that you can keep your grid very simple. Sometimes you're going to want a more complex grid if your image just has a lot of complicated lines and shapes. If the information is really complicated, more lines in your grid is going to make your job easier to accurately reproduce that image. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm thinking about these now as like 4 quadrants. So I'm going to subdivide each quadrant and make a mini version of my large grid. So I'll add another diagonal. Whoops. And I'm going to repeat my horizontal lines twice through the bottom 2 quadrants and through the top 2 quadrants. I'll also make 2 more vertical lines on the left of my center vertical and on my right. So now I have my grid and I am ready to start drawing a reproduction of this photograph onto my grid. I do want to take just a minute to clean up any lines that I may have drawn by mistake. Just get rid of anything that might be a distraction to you. It's not super important, but I like to just kind of keep things clean as I go. So when you're working with a grid, you can pretty much pick any point to start that feels good to you. What I'm going to do is start up here with this petal. And what I want to do is look at where the top of this petal is interacting with these lines here in my grid. I want to look at how far this edge is to the edge of the image. I want to see how far this is to my first horizontal line. So there's so much looking and comparing that you're doing when you're using a grid. And that's really the key to using a grid successfully, is understanding, where these points are and plotting them accurately. When I'm starting a grid, sometimes I don't even draw entire lines. I might just do little line segments. As you're laying out your image, whatever it happens to be, you're going to want to keep things really light. I can't emphasize that enough. It's going to be really tough if you're holding your pencil with a tight grip because you're nervous about not being accurate. If you lighten up on your grip, and again, I'm going to go back and forth between my tripod grip and my underhand, and I should probably be modeling my underhand for you, since I have been sort of stressing the importance of using that grip. And I'm just working my way around this grid. The nice thing about using the underhand grip is that your lines will be lighter. They'll be more delicate, especially if you hold your pencil further back towards the opposite end of where the graphite is. I am using my pinky to to control my pencil as my anchor. So I'm a little interested now in coming in and developing some of these other lines in this image. I'm going to come here and start to draw the lines on this next petal. So again, I'm looking at this little bump right here. How close is it to my horizontal line? How close is it to my center vertical? I'm going to just lightly put that in there. And one of the things that I'm noticing about this rose is that it has all these tiny little angle changes on the edges of these petals. So I am going to come in here and change my grip just so I can get in there and capture some of those angle changes, because they are very slight. And it's not something that I really have to be super mindful of right now, because that's work that I can go in and do later as I'm refining things. But it's good to notice those things as you're starting to lay out your drawing. So I'm going to probably spend, probably an hour just working on getting a good contour drawing of this blossom. I'm not going to go in and do any shading. That's going to come tomorrow. I'm going to show you how to go in there and create some of these value gradations and really work to get this to look more like the three-dimensional image that I see here in the photograph. So if you want to get a jump start on this, if you weren't here last week, I will put this image in an email and send it to you all tonight. You can just print it out. And if you have paper at home that you want to start drawing, you can do that before class tomorrow, or you can just go ahead and get this grid drawn on the photographic reference, and that'll save you a little time tomorrow. I'm thinking tomorrow we're pretty much going to spend the majority of our time working on developing the value gradations in this image. Or if you chose one of the other images, you'll be doing the same thing for that. So working on learning how to shade, working on creating smooth tones depending on the image that you're using. Most of the images have these pretty smooth tonal changes, and that's what I want to show you how to do tomorrow. So I hope this helps, and I will probably make these more often in the future now that I've made this one. I used to make videos all the time when I was teaching during COVID. So let me know what you think. Have a good evening, everybody. See you tomorrow.